Welcome to Just Men, a life-inspiring program that resonates hope as well as encouragement. I'm your host, Jeff Tate, and thank you for joining Just Men. On today's program, we're going to talk about finding inspiration through the fulfillment of divine purpose. Joining us on today's program is Matthew Pittaway. Matt, welcome to Just Men.
Nice to be here.
It's a pleasure for you to be here. Let's talk a little bit and kind of start out just kind of a quick bio on yourself and what brought you to Nashville and before we get into the scope of our discussion.
Okay, well, I was born at a young age and outside of Detroit in a suburb called Livonia, Michigan. And I was raised in a Lutheran home, which is it was a typical middle-class home, suburban home. My parents were very religious. They went to church all the time. They participated. They were leaders in the church, teachers. And I was in choir. I was an altar boy. But my parents really, they had a concept of God, and they were intellectuals, but they didn't really know the Lord personally in their hearts and walk with Him intimately as born-again believers. They were more religious people. And they fought a lot. They were in the process of getting a divorce when I was 16, and so I left home. There was really no home to be at anyway. And I got into drugs. I got into sexual perversions. I was a rock musician. I've been a musician all my life, and got into rock and roll music. I ended up in the occult. I ended up being in white magic, astrology, palmistry, all kinds of occult activities. I ended up demon-possessed, and I ended up committing several crimes that landed me in a jail cell outside of Detroit, facing possible 30 years in prison. And that's where I found myself at the age of 20 years old. And it was in that jail cell that, through a process of breaking that God allowed me to go through, that eventually He was able to convict me. And I know a lot of people go to jail and they get saved because they want to get out and they cry out to God. But I was actually foolish enough and hard-headed enough to think that I was just going to get out of this one and hustle my way through to the next thing. But God allowed a situation to occur in which there was a young man who was in the jail cell, and I was participating with other guys, and we were giving him a hard time. And this young man broke down and started crying, and I realized that all my philosophies of religion and Eastern religions and things that I believed in, all those principles and I had set for myself, I couldn't even live according to those, and they were low compared to the gospel, to my Christian upbringing. But I couldn't even live according to those. When I got in a situation where it was dog eat dog, I just became a dog. It was all about self. And when I saw myself actually hurting another human being, just to be in the crowd, so to speak, then the Lord really convicted me, and I said, I'm sick of this. And He saved me. He just saved me, right? There was no preachers or anything. I just knew instantly that Jesus was Lord, and I picked up a Bible and started reading it, and that's basically how I was born again.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. How did that, of course, obviously coming from the almost charismatic family and yet seeing the hypocrisy in your home, how did that affect or even impact your ministry and then going through prison and then where you are today?
Well, when I became born again and I was in jail, I still had many months left of my time to do. And so I started studying, and I started to talk to other prisoners. And since we were all in the same boat, so to speak, we just basically read the words that Jesus said, and we believed it because we didn't know any better. And so we read what the apostles said, and when someone got sick, I would pray for them. And I looked for miracles because I had religion and I had not seen the power of God. And so I started expecting and receiving miracles because I had changed completely as a person, and now I was on God's side and I knew it. So when I got out of jail and started looking for churches, then it was very hard for me as a new believer who really didn't have any connections with other believers at the time, other than my parents were divorced at this time and didn't even go to church. It was hard for me because I would go to churches after church and find that they were disagreeing and they had different ideas and doctrines, and yet they didn't really believe, many of them where I was living at the time Toledo, Ohio, none of them that I could find believed that miracles occurred or that God was really alive and involved in our life in a personal way. So it was pretty tough for a while.
Yeah. Now, I know that part of the inspiration that you found in ministry is your son. Let's talk a bit about your son who had passed away.
Well, my son's name is Justin, to just a little fill-in, after I finally did find a church where the people believed what the Word said, and they taught the Bible, and I started understanding doctrines, and the Lord led me to go to a Bible college, completed Bible college at Eagle's Nest Bible Training Institute in California, and I've met my wife, and we got married, and since I was a musician, I instantly translated my music over to gospel, and I was writing songs and singing. So my wife and I would travel around and do gospel music and sing the gospel and preach the gospel on streets. I've ministered in prisons, mental hospitals, rock concerts, anywhere where there was common people that wouldn't darken the door of a church was where I was headed. And by the grace of God, that's just the only person I could relate to was some street kid, because that's what I was. And I had a lot of good experiences personally and with other friends trying to minister to the lost, but I found over time that when I would lead people to Christ and bring them into the church, I would go back years later and visit them, and they hadn't grown, they hadn't matured, and it was very frustrating as a street evangelist trying to find some place where I could send people when they were saved, where they would be matured and brought to the point where then they could go minister. And so it was frustrating, and I had a lot of struggles and trials, but as far as my son, that occurred after my wife and I had been married for quite a while. We had 2 other children, and Justin was our 3rd child, and he was born in 1995 in Portland, Oregon, with a severe heart deformity. And so right away, that was pretty scary. Having a little boy that's born with a severe disability. And when he was born, the doctors told us that he wouldn't live for more than maybe 1 to 3 weeks maximum without some kind of radical surgery. And even if they did the surgery, the odds were that he probably wouldn't even live through that. So it was a tough time.
Yeah, talk a little bit and take me through that process, of course, and what you had to deal with your son. And obviously your son became an inspiration. He lived longer than the time that they expected. And kind of bring me through that and sharing that story.
Okay. Well, initially, my wife and I, having a lot of experience in ministry, we had our faith was really strong. We had, whenever our children got sick, we'd pray and God would heal them. We weren't against doctors. My kids were born in a hospital. We'd worked with doctors, but we always believed in healing. And we had seen a lot of healing miracles. So initially we started to pray for a miracle, because what the doctors were telling us was basically, a bad scenario or a worse scenario. And so we just knew that God had to have a better purpose. Also, before Justin was born, we always prayed over our children in the womb, because we wanted God to bless them, and we would minister to them. My wife would sing to them. And being a musician, we worship in the home. Study the Bible in the home, and so we really had a feeling that child would be blessed. But the Lord spoke to me and He said, I want you to name this boy Isaac, his little boy. And if you remember, Isaac was the one that Abraham had to offer up on the altar. So I had a feeling, another thing the Lord spoke to me as I studied the Word was Isaiah was told that his children would be signs to his nation. And my uncles both fought in World War II. My dad was in the Korean War. I've always been very patriotic, and I've always loved America, and I've always believed that America is destined to be a refuge for people around the world who want freedom and prosperity and to know God and experience God's blessing. And I believe that's our destiny. So the Lord spoke to me, and He said, as I told Isaiah that his children would be signs to the nation, your children will be signs to this nation, to America. And so I had this in my heart. So when this all started to happen, there was a strong faith that God had already